Hello, I'm Dalton Delan. I'm a columnist for the Berkshire Eagle, and this is Eagle Reels, where we take you beyond the news. My very special guest today, Professor Robert Kaufmann of Boston University. Welcome, Professor Kaufmann.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Viewers, we're talking oil today. If like me, you remember the Beverly Hillbillies, we're talking black gold Texas tea. Let's launch right into it. Professor Kaufmann, gasoline in Massachusetts is up more than $1 a gallon since the start of the conflict with Iran. If the Straits of Hormuz remain closed, will costs at the pump continue to rise? Will you give us a sense of the timeline of turning the aircraft carrier, as it were, of oil prices?
So typically what happens is when there's a disruption to the normal supply chain, prices at the pump rise very quickly. So we're seeing that, but we have not seen the full effects yet of these higher prices at the pump. Furthermore, prices are continuing to increase. So today is Good Friday, the markets are closed, but yesterday, oil went up $11 a barrel to about $111, $112 a barrel. So that most recent $10 rise is not at the pumps by any means yet.
Thank you. Well, Massachusetts neither produces nor refines any crude oil. Does that make the state more susceptible to supply shocks?
Not really. There's one big world oil market, and whether you produce oil or consume oil, you pay the same price. And so, even if Massachusetts were completely self-sufficient in oil, it wouldn't make a difference. The only difference is if Massachusetts produced oil, then some of our extra money spent on, let's say, motor gasoline would be going to oil producers here in Massachusetts, but instead all that money is flowing out of the state to either companies in the United States who are producing oil or to producers overseas.
So, Professor Kaufmann, the largest component of pricing of gasoline is crude oil costs. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
So what does it take to bring those down? Is it the world geopolitics? Are there other factors at play?
So what it's going to take is an end to the war with Iran and a reopening of the Straits of Hormuz and several weeks for those tankers to reach where they need to have gone. And we need to make up for the oil lost during the war. So during this war, the straits have been closed for about 4 or 5 weeks. That's 4 or 5 weeks of supply that's in effect missing. Producers, oil refiners, wholesalers, retailers have been pulling down their inventories. When the war is over, when the straits are reopened, those people will want to refill their inventories. And so that will keep prices higher, even while things seem to be getting back to normal.
So, to help fill that gap that you just talked about, President Trump released, I think, one of the highest releases ever from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, 172 million barrels. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Well, it's a good thing if you want to keep prices down, but let's put that 170 million, was it 170 million barrels you said?
172.
Okay, close enough. So let's put that in some context. The US uses about 20 million barrels of oil a day. So that really represents 8 days of supply. So the war's been going on 4 to 5 weeks. That's somewhere between 28 and 35 days. So, it's good that he did it. It has helped with prices, but it doesn't offset. It sounds like a big number, but what we use each day is an even bigger number.
I guess we should be singing the Beatles 8 days a week or something.
Yeah.
Um, well, of that 20 million barrels that of daily that you mentioned, the U.S. produces only about 40% of it. Should we increase that? Could we increase that?
Well, let's hope that's not the solution to the war, because what it would take to increase US production, that effort would take months, if not years. So I'm hoping that this war does not go on for more months and years, despite his recitation of the time that previous wars have persisted. And so it doesn't seem like a solution to our problem.
Something that our viewers and readers might not realize is that oil refineries process different kinds of crude oil. Because of this, can it be cheaper to import oil than to transport it domestically?
Yeah, so oil comes in different flavors, and think of it as sour and sweet, heavy and light. So sour and sweet refers to the sulfur content in the crude oil. Sour implies that there's a lot of sulfur, which means that a lot of processing is required to remove that sulfur, which, everything else being equal, makes that kind of crude oil more expensive to process and therefore less valuable, having a lower price to refineries. The other thing is light and heavy. What refineries do is, excuse me, is they take heavy crude oil, or they take crude oil which exists in long carbon chain molecules, and breaks it up into smaller chain molecules. So what you put in your gasoline octane, when you go to the pump and you see the octane rating, that refers to the 8 carbon chain molecules. So what a refinery is doing is taking those long chains, breaking it up into more valuable and more useful, what's called refined petroleum products. So the lighter the product, like jet fuel and motor gasoline, they tend to be more valuable than the heavier products like residual fuel oil. And everything else being equal, lighter crude oils produce a bigger yield, a larger percentage yield of valuable products like crude oil, jet fuel. And so refiners are willing to pay a higher price for those lighter crudes. Now, in the US, especially in the Gulf Coast, a lot of refineries are set up to take heavy crude oil. And there's, even though those refineries, that setup is more expensive, now they can take that cheaper crude oil and produce more valuable products. And so that's why the US imports a lot of oil from Venezuela, because it's heavy. Even though it's heavy and its overall price is lower, these refineries are set up to use it and can make a larger, what we call, refinery margin or profit on each barrel used. So they don't want to buy the good stuff because they've already paid for what's needed to use the quote bad stuff or the cheaper stuff. And so that's why every refinery has kind of an optimal mix of crude oil that it would prefer, excuse me again, that it would prefer to use.
So, of all of the energy consumption in the world, I believe about a third of it is based on petroleum products, okay? But for transportation, despite the hype around electronic vehicles, it's still the primary driver is fuel. Friends of mine at the Department of Energy tell me that I should always shop for top tier gasoline. Can you give us a little sense of for our cars, keeping them running as we all want to do economically, top tier, the brands with ethanol?
So unless you have a high performance vehicle, you do not need motor gasoline with the highest octane content. You know, what's called super or premium gasoline. Your engine does not need that. So unless you have a very fancy car, a sports car, there's no reason to pay top dollar for that.
Great, great. Thank you. Well, we all want to save some money right now. Um, so, you know, I was just out in California where the regular gasoline at a no-name pump was over $6. It's under 4 right now as we tape in Massachusetts, the lower half of states, I believe. How is that? I mean, I thought all the cars in the world are in California. If they have all the cars, why would they be 50, more than 50% higher?
So different areas have different motor gasoline prices because of air pollution requirements. So California, a lot of cities in California are in geographic areas where if you burn a lot of motor gasoline, you tend to generate a lot of smog, what we call photochemical smog, and which is hazardous to your health. In order to reduce that, certain areas burn special blends of gasoline that generate less smog, and producing those gasolines is more expensive. So my youngest daughter lives in Phoenix. If you fly into Phoenix, the Valley of the Sun, you pay about 50 cents to $1 a gallon more than you would pay just 100 miles south in Tucson, where they don't have that smog problem. So it really depends upon air pollution, the tendency for that area to have air pollution problems. And it gets more expensive in the summer when the sun is stronger and that smog tends to form more strongly because of the stronger sunlight.
Well, Massachusetts is on the upper end of states, I think, that care about the environment. So maybe you're giving us a pocketbook reason, right?
So those regulations are determined at the national level. So it's not up to states. There are compliance areas as designated by the EPA that have to burn these special blends of gasoline.
Okay. Well, I'm going to shift us from the pump to the home. Something a little, I believe, is chemically a little closer to diesel, which is home heating oil. Now in Massachusetts, well, okay, you'll tell me I'm totally wrong, Professor.
No, I'm just laughing because I used to heat my home with heating oil.
Uh,
Now I
okay.
have a heat pump and we can talk about that,
Oh,
but
yeah, I want to ask you about that. Let's just do that. I was going to say, so I know that the run rate for electric heating pumps and natural gas, they're both have lower operating costs, but given the upfront costs of conversion, how long would it take to make it worth switching?
so a lot of that depends on where you live. But the idea is the following. Yes, it's expensive up front, but my wife and I did it in our home because the heat pump provides both heat in the winter and cooling during the summer. And we bought a house that had central AC from the 1970s.
Mhm.
And, that unit died. There were no parts for it. So we asked what would it cost to fix it or replace it? And the cost to replace the air conditioning system was basically the same as the cost of replacing it all with heat pumps, above ground heat pumps. So no drilling involved. And it was about the same. We said, great. And so we still have our oil heat in the winter, which we had to turn on a few times this winter because it was just so cold. But other than that, we never turn on our heat. So the minute it gets much above freezing, 32, the heat pumps are fine. And in the summer, we have air conditioning also at a much more efficient price or a lower price than the most efficient air conditioner would have done for us. So it's turned out to be great.
So you do have that backup you mentioned, but
Yeah.
I think I just heard you say we're going to give the lie to that myth that New England winters make us it not a good place for heat pumps, right?
I think that's incorrect. It's not correct for me anymore. And we put our heat pumps in almost a decade ago. So I am willing to bet that the technology on heat pumps has improved such that, except for the very coldest of nights, you can get away the whole winter with heat pumps. And on those very cold nights, people out in the Berkshires, I'm sure, have wood stoves and some wood, or you have your old oil-fired furnace that you can fire up for a day or two, and you can make it through without steadily burning heating oil, or as I like to joke, throw another $5 bill on the fire.
That's great. Now, the western half and the southern tier of Massachusetts had extraordinarily critical shortages of propane this winter. We use some propane. Now, I spoke with a propane truck driver who actually told me the harrowing tale of escaping an attempted hijacking in February. What happened? Propane, there was really a shortage.
So I'm not sure what happened with propane, but the price of propane is tied to the price of crude oil because they're substitutes. You can run your house on heating oil, on propane, on natural gas. And so those prices tend to move together. So when the price of crude oil went up, so did the price of natural gas and the price of propane. And that was further or that linkage was exacerbated by the fact that not only is there crude oil coming through the Straits of Hormuz, but there's liquefied natural gas that comes out of those straits. And so the price of natural gas was going up with or without the price increase of crude oil.
Thank you. So, beginning our dismount from this fascinating conversation, a two-part question. Is there anything about our reliance of oil that keeps you up at night, as it were, and any recommendations for us as consumers?
So let me start with the latter. So I drive advertisement a 2018 Chevy Bolt. It's an electric car. It's pretty inexpensive. And I will say, I'm never going back to an internal combustion engine. It's cheaper to run. So I'm now paying probably the equivalent of $1.40, $1.60 a gallon of gasoline, given the efficiency of the car. It runs absolutely silent. I really don't have any problems with range anxiety. And I don't replace the oil. There's no oil in the car. There's no exhaust system, so mufflers don't fall off or exhaust pipes don't wear through. There's no coolant system, so I don't have to worry about fans or radiators or leaking fluids. So I would recommend that. I guess what keeps me up at night is the following. We have now made a mess in the Middle East. nothing's coming from the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices are high here, but in other places around the world, there are physical shortages of crude oil. Literally, in places in Sri Lanka, they're closing schools one day a week, they're closing work one day a week. I worry that if we just leave this mess, people are going to blame us, and rightfully so, for this mess. And, we're causing, yes, a lot of monetary or fiscal misery for people in the United States, but we're causing physical misery for people in the rest of the world. So fertilizer's not coming through the straits. You and I, we're relatively wealthy compared to poorer countries. We'll buy all the food we want. We'll cut back on other things, but we're not going to starve to death. But if this lack of fertilizer really reduces agricultural production in the rest of the world, people are going to starve. And for better or for worse, it's our fault. And I worry about what America's role will be over the next decades. Is this the end of American leadership and the beginning of not Russian leadership, but maybe Chinese leadership of the world?
Professor Kaufmann, thank you for a really enlightening, sobering conversation, perhaps particularly for this midterm election year.
Yep. Well, you're more than welcome.
Viewers, if you're already a subscriber to the Berkshire Eagle, thank you. If you're not yet a subscriber, please consider becoming one. That's how you can learn about what kind of car. I'm Dalton Delan. I'll see you next time on Eagle Reels and in the pages of the Berkshire Eagle.